Controversial comedian and political commentator Bill Maher recently had a conversation with disgraced former MAGA Republican Congressman Matt Gaetz, and things got pretty heated when the topic turned to January 6th and the peaceful transfer of power, and Bill Maher quickly shut down Gaetz's attempt to establish a false equivalence between the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. But before we unpack all that, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert bells before you go. All right, friends, we got a couple of clips to play from the most recent episode of Club Random, which is Bill Maher's podcast. He's had it for a couple of years now. He's had a bunch of guests on, celebrities, other political commentators, people who very often disagree with him. And basically, the shtick is they talk for like an hour to 2 hours while Bill Maher gets crossfaded. He gets high and drunk at the same time. And this conversation was relatively chummy between these two, which is unfortunate given how despicable Matt Gaetz is. But where Bill Maher can be relied on is quickly shutting down false equivalence between the elected Democratic Party and the elected Republican Party. And he did so here as Matt Gaetz tried to create a false equivalence on the topic of peaceful transfers of power.
Agree to sell to us or just taking from another country. That's what Hitler did, and that's Putin. We're not. I know you guys like to be like flirting with authoritarianism, but well, let me ask you that question. You're a married man now, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So, and your wife is lovely.
Thank you.
You did well. And okay, so sometimes in a marriage, the couple, I've heard both sides. I've heard couples say, yeah, I'm a big flirt, but it's okay because he knows I'll never cross the line. But so that's just okay in the marriage. That's like they've decided that's okay to flirt, or the guy does it. Then I've heard some marriages where it's like, no, that is crossing the line. Okay, I bring this up because you guys are really flirting with authoritarianism. You know what I mean? He admires.
Like, we didn't try to throw our political prisoners in jail. We talked about it, but we didn't actually try.
Oh, you did try.
We never indicted Hillary. We never indicted our enemies.
Yeah, because they blocked it. But you absolutely.
So, and this is.
Who blocked it?
The Justice Department.
Okay, thank you. Okay, listen, I got to say, I almost gave this a standing ovation because nobody ever brings this up except I feel just me and now apparently Bill. So there's a lot of revisionist history that goes on with the first Trump administration because they screwed up so many times and they did so many crazy authoritarian things, it's hard to keep track. But when MAGA Republicans tell you, as Matt Gaetz did, okay, sure, we talked about jailing our political opponents, but we never tried, it's actually bullshit. They did try. We've talked about New York Times exposés on this topic. We've discussed it multiple times at length. During the Trump administration, he attempted to publicly and privately pressure the Justice Department to go after his political opponents, be it John Kerry, former Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton, former Secretary of State, former FBI Director James Comey, his own former attorney, Michael Cohen. There were multiple attempts by Trump to pressure the Justice Department, and the Justice Department did indeed investigate. On some level, sometimes it was just a preliminary investigation. Sometimes it was much more comprehensive, as with Michael Cohen. They did attempt to investigate Donald Trump's political opponents. The fact that most of these things never went anywhere is just testament to the fact that these people didn't actually behave unlawfully. It wasn't a lack of effort on Trump's part. So Bill Maher is right to bring this up because Matt Gaetz just lied to his face and to the face of his audience. Trump did try. He just failed. And I'm sorry, just there's no equivalence here. President Biden didn't campaign on jailing his political opponents. It just so happens that Donald Trump engaged in unlawful behavior. Elected Democrats are simply morally superior to elected Republicans, and Bill Maher is correct to point this out.
Well, there were actually some people there at the beginning who were a little more fair-minded. I mean, it's not going to be that way in the second term, although that's the job you were up for.
I was, and honestly, I was.
If you had been there in 2016, would you have indicted Hillary?
Only if that's what the facts and the law commanded. I wouldn't have.
Matt, come on, Matt.
Done it as some get back politically, because look, that doesn't end. And what I understand is if you do that to them and they do that to us, then you don't ever get out of the cycle. And as someone who has held some power, it's a pretty frightening concept that when you get out, the people who take power then can utilize the apparatus of the state to deprive you of your freedom.
But of course, you went right to whataboutism. You didn't really answer
well, I reject the premise that we flirt with authoritarianism.
Are you? Come on, man. Seriously? Using every possible lever to stay in office after he lost the election, plainly. Um, just always being friends with Putin. He likes him. He likes Viktor Orban. Always like pining to be with Team Strongman and not really being that, not really that, into our allies. You don't think that's flirting with authoritarianism? And if you flirt with it, he also makes jokes about, maybe after this term, if it's so good, we should have another one, which would be, again, an abrogation of the basic tenets of the Constitution, 2 terms. That's flirting. That's flirting. To even make a joke about it is flirting with authoritarianism. My question, like in a marriage, can you just flirt and not cross the line?
Of course.
And again, Matt Gaetz would never accept that if the shoe were on the other foot. He simply wouldn't. If the shoe were on the other foot and Democrats had been talking about repealing the 22nd Amendment so President Obama could run for a 3rd term, or locking up Donald Trump, if Hillary Clinton campaigned on imprisoning Donald Trump in the 2016 election, Matt Gaetz and other Republicans would be apoplectic. I'll also point out that it's not just a joke. We actually have Andy Ogles, an elected Republican congressman, a former colleague of Matt Gaetz, in the United States House of Representatives, as we discussed in a previous video, proffering legislation to change the 22nd Amendment so as to allow Donald Trump to run for a 3rd term. So it's not just a joke, which I agree would be bad enough, because I do believe that the words of presidents, be they Democrat or Republican, I believe words matter. These are the most powerful people on earth. And I'm sorry, rhetoric can compel action. So it is important. And it's not just a joke. There's legislation behind it now. So again, good on Bill Maher for doing this. They deviate, they go off topic for just a few seconds, and then they go right back to the conversation. And again, Bill Maher's pretty good about shutting this shit down.
Yeah, it's not like the left doesn't do a version. I mean, they should not have been bitching about Trump is not a legitimate president. That was wrong. I agree. It's very different than actually trying to stay in power. We just had January 6th. It went off smoothly without a hitch. Places, everyone places. Okay, the rehearsal went great, and now we do it and we go home. But that's not what would have happened if you guys had lost, and you know that.
Bill, you understand
that is an asymmetry you have to address.
Okay, let me address it. You're right. This past week, we had a wonderful January 6th. The last time we had a Republican president elected and Democrats did not object to the electors, do you know when the last time that was?
See, this is the kind of bullshit.
Look, it was 1988. It was 1988 the last time they didn't object to Republicans. They objected to George W. Bush winning Ohio.
Object is different than calling the Justice Department and pressuring them to do things that even his own Justice Department wouldn't do. It's different than calling the guy in Georgia and saying, find me 11,000 votes. It's different than going to court with all these ridiculous cases that were laughed out of every courtroom. It's different than actually sending fake electors. Don't give me bullshit and we'll be friends. Bullshit me? No, we'll still be friends. But then I'll think you're a hack, instead of someone who could actually have an honest conversation and admit this asymmetry exists.
The asymmetry is there. It is. And that's the word that I've often used to describe the current political ecosystem. It is an asymmetry. It is true that Democrats in the past have objected to Republican victories, and we can debate whether or not that was prudent, whether or not that was petulant, but it was a handful of Democrats. It stood no chance of succeeding because the vast majority of Democrats, even though they didn't like the particular outcome, including in 2016 when Donald Trump won, they voted to certify the election. That's just a fact. As a matter of fact, after the 2020 election, and on January 6, 2021, more than 100, about 140 elected Republicans voted to not certify President Biden's victory, which is orders of magnitude greater than any Democratic objection to any Democrat or Republican president. Again, think about that. After the insurrection, after the violent attempt at a coup, 140 elected Republicans voted against certifying President Biden's victory. We've never had 140 Democrats. Even if you added up the total number of Democrats who have ever objected to a Republican victory, you're talking like 10, right? And in one election, 140 Republicans, after violent Trump supporters attempted a violent coup. The asymmetry is staggering. We're not just simply talking about objections, which is a constitutional right, and thankfully, because of amendments made to the Electoral Count Act, the burden for noting an objection, for making a formal objection, is even higher than it was before, and probably should be, to cut down on the bad faith, particularly that we saw from Republicans. But Bill Maher is right. Democrats didn't call the election rigged. Democrats did not refuse to commit to a peaceful transfer of power. Democrats did not formally concede. They did. Vice President Al Gore conceded publicly and privately to President Bush. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton publicly and privately conceded to Donald Trump. Vice President Kamala Harris publicly and privately also conceded to Donald Trump. But Donald Trump never publicly or privately conceded to President Biden, never committed to the peaceful transfer of power. There wasn't a peaceful transfer of power because January 6th is a crucial part of the peaceful transfer of power, and it was not peaceful. By definition, there was no peaceful transfer of power after the 2020 election. So there is the staggering asymmetry. And again, Bill Maher throughout this conversation is a bit too credulous throughout the bulk of it with Matt Gaetz. Gives Matt Gaetz too much of the benefit of the doubt. But when it comes to distinguishing elected Democrats versus elected Republicans and the craziness on the Republican side, the authoritarian streak on the Republican side, Bill Maher is pretty reliable. And he's been pretty consistent, saying for all of his issues with the left, and most of them I think are absurd, but whatever his issues are with the left, he recognizes that the right is much more dangerous and much more authoritarian, and their elected proxies, the Republican Party, are just objectively worse. So glad to see that be reaffirmed here. In the meantime, let me know what you think in the comments.